The night my sister handed me a manila envelope instead of looking me in the eye, I knew exactly what was inside. My father had been dead for 11 days. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten 10,000 dinners, where a mother used to quiz us on state capitals, where my father once cried watching a nature documentary about elephants because he said he didn't know why. He just loved them. And she slit that envelope across the wood like it was a gas bill. The attorney already went over everything with Nolan and me, she said. This is your copy. Her name is Celeste. She's 4 years older than me, married to a man named Nolan who wears boat shoes indoors, and has never, in the 7 years I've known him, asked me a single question about my life. Not one. Not even to be polite. I didn't open the envelope right away. I looked at her face instead. She had her reading glasses pushed up on her head, a glass of white wine in her hand, and she was already looking at her phone. That told me everything. My name is June. I'm 31 years old. I spent the last 4 years working as a paralegal at a small firm in Columbus, Ohio, which means I know exactly how an estate can be structured to make one child feel like an afterthought. Our father was a quiet man, a civil engineer. He spent 40 years designing drainage systems for municipalities across the Midwest, which sounds unglamorous until you realize that the reason entire neighborhoods don't flood every spring is because of men like him who did the unglamorous work without needing anyone to notice. He noticed things, though. He always noticed things. Inside the envelope was a 2-page document. The house, the 4-bedroom colonial in Bexley where Celeste and I grew up, recently appraised at $740,000, went to Celeste. The investment account, roughly $280,000, split between Celeste and Nolan as a household. The car, a 2019 Volvo in perfect condition, went to Celeste. To me, a self-storage facility. Not a house. Not money. A self-storage facility. Not a house. Not money. A self-storage facility. Specifically, a 12-unit storage facility on the east side of Columbus, on a street I'd driven past maybe twice in my life, in a part of town that people from Bexley don't tend to go unless they're lost. The document listed its assessed tax value at $47,000. It noted that the property had not generated rental income in approximately 3 years. It noted that the electric bill was being paid automatically from an account I didn't recognize. Celeste watched me read it. I know it's not ideal, she said in the voice she uses when she's already decided she doesn't want to discuss something, but Daddy always said the house should stay in the family, and Nolan and I are the ones with kids. So he has 2 kids, I said, from his first marriage. They live in Phoenix. June. I'm just saying they're his kids. June, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I put the document back in the envelope. I stood up. I said I needed some air. I drove to my apartment, which is a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building that smells like other people's cooking and has a parking lot light that buzzes all night. I sat in my car for a while. I didn't cry. I'd cried plenty in the 11 days since my father died, on the phone with the hospital, in the parking garage afterward, in the shower every morning like clockwork. But sitting in that buzzing parking lot, I didn't cry. I felt something flatter than grief, something like being handed a note that says this is what you were worth to us, and being expected to say thank you. I went inside. I poured myself a glass of water. I looked at the envelope on my kitchen counter for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and looked up the address of the storage facility. I went on a Saturday morning because I didn't know what else to do with it. My father had left me a property. That property was mine now. The least I could do was look at it. The facility was on Hartwell Avenue, sandwiched between a tire shop and a vacant lot that had clearly once been a gas station. The building itself was a long, low concrete structure, painted beige sometime in the 90s and not painted since. A chain-link fence ran along the perimeter. The gate was padlocked. The envelope had included 2 keys. One was small and brass, clearly for a padlock. The other was a standard door key on a plain ring with no label. The padlock opened on the first try. I walked in. The lot was overgrown in the corners, crabgrass pushing up through the asphalt. There were 12 roll-up doors, 6 on each side of a central corridor that was covered by a corrugated metal roof, but open on both ends. Most of the doors had their own padlocks. Some were newer. Some were rusted in a way that made me think no one had touched them in years. The facility was quiet. I walked the length of it. An orange cat watched me from the top of the fence and then disappeared. I tried the second key on one of the locked units. It didn't fit. I tried the second key on one of the locked units. It didn't fit. I tried another. Nothing. On the 4th unit, I tried Unit 7, near the far end of the row. The key went in, turned, and the lock fell open in my hand. I crouched down, grabbed the handle, and rolled the door up. It was dark inside. I used my phone flashlight. Cardboard boxes, stacked in uneven columns toward the back. A green metal shelving unit. A rolled-up rug leaning against the left wall. An old oscillating fan. A folded card table. The kind of things that end up in storage because no one can bring themselves to throw them out and no one has a reason to retrieve them. I was already calculating, in the back of my mind, what it would cost to clear the units out. Haul everything to Goodwill, maybe keep the shelving, whether the property could be sold or whether the assessed value was the joke I suspected it was. $47,000, less than my car. I pulled one of the cardboard boxes toward me and opened it. Old tax returns. My father's handwriting on the folder labels, neat and careful. Civil, the way he did everything. I sat down on the concrete floor of Unit 7 and went through 4 boxes before I found anything that made me pause. It was a receipt, a maintenance receipt dated 14 months ago for climate control servicing. The unit number on the receipt was not 7. It was Unit 11. I want to tell you something about my father. He was not a sentimental man in the way people mean when they say sentimental. He didn't keep birthday cards or get emotional about anniversaries, but he was meticulous. Every folder labeled, every bill filed by month and year, and he was above everything else, deliberate. He didn't do things by accident. He didn't forget things. He didn't lose receipts. He left me a receipt for Unit 11 and a box of tax returns. In Unit 7, the key I had didn't open Unit 11. The padlock on Unit 11 was newer than the others. A heavy master lock, matte black, the kind that doesn't rust and doesn't give. I stood in front of it for a full minute. Then I went back to my car, drove to the hardware store 6 blocks away, and bought a set of bolt cutters. I want to be clear, the property was mine. The facility was mine. Every unit in it was mine. I was not breaking into anything that didn't belong to me. I cut the lock. I grabbed the handle. I rolled the door up. The smell hit me first. Not a bad smell. A specific smell. Oil and metal, and something dry and old. The smell of engines that haven't run in years but were maintained with care. I held my phone up. There were 4 of them. Cars. Covered in fitted car covers, gray, perfectly fitted, parked side by side in a space that should not have been large enough, but was. Because Unit 11 was not a standard unit. It was a double unit, the back wall removed at some point to connect to whatever was behind it. The space was probably 60 feet deep. I pulled the cover off the nearest one. My hands were shaking before I even finished pulling. It was a 1967 Pontiac GTO, condensation blue. Chrome trim polished so carefully that in the beam of my phone flashlight it looked like it was lit from inside. I walked the perimeter of it slowly, the way you walk around something you don't fully believe is real. The interior was burgundy leather, preserved in a way that shouldn't have been possible for a car this age. The odometer, visible through the window, read 34,000 miles. I know cars because my father loved cars. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't have a garage, didn't have money for a hobby like that, or so I'd always thought. But when I was small, he used to take me to car shows on Sunday mornings, just the 2 of us. Before Celeste woke up, he'd walk me through the lots and tell me the history of each car, like he was introducing me to old friends. He pointed at a GTO once. He'd said, "That's the car that invented the muscle car." Everything that came after was trying to catch up. I stood in Unit 11, and I looked at all 4 of them, and I understood, for the first time, that my father had been doing something for a very long time that no one in our family knew about. I also understood that he had known exactly what he was doing when he left this to me, and not to Celeste. I didn't tell anyone. I know that might sound strange, to discover something like that and stay quiet, but I'd spent enough years in a family where the moment you showed someone something valuable, the conversation immediately became about why it should be redistributed, reassigned, shared. I had watched Celeste talk my father into co-signing a refinance mortgage for her and Nolan 8 years ago. Watched her present it as the only logical option. Watched my father say yes because he had a particular inability to disappoint people he loved, even people who were in the process of disappointing him. I went home. I did not tell Celeste. Instead, I spent that night doing research. Legitimate research. The kind I knew how to do from years of document work. I started with the GTO. Then I worked my way through the other 3. A 1969 Camaro Z28, a 1970 Plymouth Cuda, and a 1971 Chevelle SS. All American muscle. All originals, as far as I could tell from photos and being research. All in what appeared to be exceptional condition. I found the maintenance records in a plastic tote in the back of Unit 11. My father had stored them the way he stored everything: chronological, labeled, thorough. The cars had been serviced every 2 years by a private mechanic named Roy out of a shop in Zanesville. Oil changes, fluid flushes, tire pressure checks, battery maintenance. My father had been keeping these cars alive for 23 years. 23 years. Celeste was in high school. I was in second grade. He'd built a climate control system into the unit, a custom installation, which explained the electric bill. I went back and looked at the facility records. The account paying that bill was a trust account I'd never heard of. It had been set up in 1999 and had been auto-paying ever since. He planned this. Whatever this was, he planned it for a very long time. I called Roy in Zanesville on a Tuesday morning. I introduced myself. I told him I was Felix Calloway's daughter. There was a long pause. The younger one, Roy said. Not a question. Yes. Another pause. He told me you'd call someday. Yes. Another pause. He told me you'd call someday. Said to be straight with you. I'd appreciate that. Those cars, Roy said, are worth a considerable amount of money. The GTO especially. I had an offer on it 2 years back. Fellow from a dealership in Nashville. Your father turned it down. Said it wasn't time. What was he waiting for? Roy was quiet for a moment. I think he was waiting for you to be ready. I had never done anything like what I did next. I want to say that plainly. I am not a bold person by nature. I am methodical. I make lists. I research things before I do them. I am the daughter of a civil engineer, and I think like one, measure twice, cut once. Know where the water is going to go before you start digging. I contacted 3 auction houses. I explained that I had 4 American muscle cars in documented exceptional condition and that I was looking for the right venue for a private sale or auction. The first house sent back a form email. The second one asked for photos. The third one, a specialist auction house based in Chicago that dealt specifically in collector vehicles, asked me to send everything I had, photos, VINs, documentation, provenance records, and got back to me within 48 hours. Their initial response included the phrase significant market interest and asked when we could schedule a formal inspection. I sat at my kitchen counter and read that email 4 times. Then I called Roy and told him an inspector was coming. The inspection happened on a Thursday. The inspector was a woman named Dana, late 40s, who arrived in a company SUV and spent 3 hours going through each car with a methodology that reminded me, honestly, of the way my father approached his work. Thorough. Quiet. Deliberate. She photographed every panel, every wheel, well, every inch of interior. She ran the VINs through databases I didn't have access to. She checked the block stamps on the engines. At the end of 3 hours, she stood in the entrance of Unit 11 and looked at her clipboard and then looked at me. Miss Proper. Calloway, she said. Do you know what you have here? I'm getting an idea, I said. The GTO is a tri-power car, numbers matching. The Camaro is an original Z28 documented, original engine, factory paperwork. The Cuda is a 440 6-pack. The Chevelle is a matching numbers LS6. She paused. These are not collector cars in the general sense. These are significant collector cars, the kind of cars that appear at major auctions maybe once a decade. I said, okay. She said, the GTO alone could clear $500,000 at the right sale. The Camaro could push 400. The other 2. She shook her head slightly. I would need to confer with our specialists, but conservatively, I think you're looking at well over $1.5 million for the collection, possibly considerably more. I looked at the cars. My father's cars. 23 years of careful maintenance, of electric bills paid from a trust account, of a mechanic in Zanesville who made biannual trips to check the battery and rotate the tires. My father, I said, was a civil engineer. Said Dana. He made a good living. Not extraordinary. We had a regular house. We took 1 vacation a year, usually driving distance. Some people, Dana said carefully, have a knack for knowing what things will be worth before other people know it. I didn't tell Celeste until the sale was finalized. I want to explain this decision because I know how it sounds. Celeste is my sister. We grew up in the same house. There was a time, probably when we were children, when we were close in the way that siblings who don't know better are close. Not because of any particular affinity, but because you're both small and the world is large and there's comfort in having someone nearby who knows the same things you know. But somewhere along the way, Celeste became someone who took up space that wasn't hers and called it her right. She did it with my father's attention. She did it with his money, when she could. She did it with the story of our family, the way she told it to her friends, her husband, her kids, a version where she was the responsible one, the present one, the one who mattered, I was the younger one, the background character. When our father got sick, when it became clear over the last 2 years of his life that this was the illness that wasn't going to get better, it was me who adjusted my schedule. It was me who learned which pharmacist at Kroger was the most efficient, and which insurance forms needed to be filed in what order and what time his home care nurse arrived, and whether the heating pad was the kind with the auto shut-off. It was me who sat with him on the bad nights. Celeste came on holidays. She came on the week he died, and she stayed in a hotel because she said the house was too sad for her. She sent me that envelope across the kitchen table and went back to looking at her phone. So no, I didn't tell her. I signed the consignment agreement on a Monday. The auction was scheduled for 6 weeks later, in Chicago, part of the house's annual collector car event. They listed all 4 vehicles. The catalog entry for the GTO alone ran 2 pages. I took the bus to Chicago. I sat in the back of the auction room in a blazer I'd bought at Target, and I watched 4 cars that my father had preserved for 2 decades sell to people who understood what they were. The GTO went first. The room opened at $420,000 and moved fast. It closed at $610,000. I stopped breathing for a moment. The Camaro brought $395,000. The Cuda, $380,000. The Chevelle, the L6, the car Dana had said could surprise us, closed at $490,000. Total, before fees, $1,075,000. Total, before fees, $1,875,000. After the auction house's commission, after taxes, after the fees I'd already researched and prepared for, $1,384,000 deposited into an account in my name at a credit union in Columbus, Ohio. I walked out of the auction house onto Michigan Avenue and stood on the sidewalk in the wind off the lake, and I thought about my father watching a nature documentary about elephants and not being able to explain why he was crying. I think I understand it better now. Some things are too large to explain. You just feel them. I called Celeste on a Sunday morning, 6 weeks after the auction. She answered on the 3rd ring, slightly impatient in the way she always is on Sunday mornings, like the call is interrupting something important even if she's just making coffee. "Hey," she said. "What's up?" "Not a question. A transaction. I wanted to let you know," I said, "that I finished sorting out Dad's storage facility." A pause. "Okay." There were cars inside. Another pause longer. Cars. Collector cars. 4 of them. He'd been maintaining them for about 23 years. I kept my voice very even. I had practiced this conversation in my kitchen at 6 in the morning for 3 days. I sold them at auction in Chicago last month. Silence. "Celeste." "How much?" she said. Her voice had changed. It had gone quiet in a way I recognized. The quiet she uses when she's calculating. "After fees and taxes," I said, "just over $1.3 million. The silence that followed was the longest I have ever heard from my sister. I have heard her hold her tongue when she was angry. I have heard her talk herself out of a response she'd regret. This was different. This was a silence that sounded like the specific moment when someone realizes that what they thought was true is not, and that the revision is not in their favor. "June," she finally said. "He left it to me," I said. "The facility was mine. The contents were mine. I had everything appraised, documented, and sold through a licensed auction house. I have records of everything." "He didn't know what was in there," she said. He would have told us. He knew exactly what was in there," I said. "He built a climate control system in 1999 and paid for it for 23 years. He had a mechanic in Zanesville check on them regularly. He left me a maintenance receipt and a box of tax returns where I'd find it." I heard her breathe. "He left it to you on purpose," she said. Flat. Stating it. "Yes," I said. She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear Nolan in the background asking something and her hand covering the phone. "That's not fair," she said when she came back. "He was our father, June. You can't just—" "He was our father," I said. "And he made a decision about what to do with something that belonged to him. I'm letting you know as a courtesy." She hung up. "Here's what I've done since then, because I think it matters to say it plainly, without drama. I am not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because my father spent 40 years designing systems that made water go where it was supposed to go, and I think you would like knowing that the money went where it was supposed to go. I paid off my student loans, $34,000. I moved into an apartment without a buzzing parking lot light. I set aside 6 months of expenses in a savings account because I am my father's daughter, and we do not spend money we might need. I opened a Roth IRA and maxed it for the year. I found a fee-only financial advisor, not a commission-based one. Because again, paralegal, I know the difference. With the remainder, I bought a small commercial property, not storage, a different kind of asset. A mixed-use building on the east side of Columbus, 2 storefronts on the ground floor and 2 apartments above. One storefront is leased to a woman who runs a bakery. The other is leased to a physical therapist. Both leases are solid. The building needed a new roof, which I budgeted for, and new HVAC in the apartments, which I also budgeted for. I am not a millionaire in the way that word sounds in a movie. I am a 31-year-old woman in Columbus, Ohio, who is no longer afraid of her bank account. My father used to say, "The best infrastructure is the kind nobody notices." It just works. It keeps working. And the only reason nobody notices is because you did it right the first time. I think about that a lot now. Celeste called me once more, about 3 months later. She said she'd spoken to an attorney. She didn't say which one. And he'd said that she might have grounds to contest the estate on the basis that the storage facility's contents hadn't been properly disclosed in the original appraisal. I said I'd spoken to an attorney too. I said that the facility had been appraised at its assessed tax value, which was the standard for real property, and that personal property stored within it transferred with the property itself under the terms of the will, which had been drafted carefully. Carefully. My word choice. She was quiet. I said, "Dad drafted that will 18 months before he died. He knew what was in Unit 11. He appraised the facility on purpose." Another silence. Then, "How do you know he drafted it 18 months ago?" "Because I asked the attorney," I said. "His name is Leonard Marsh. He's been in Columbus for 30 years, and he was very patient in explaining everything to me." She didn't call again after that. I don't know if she will. I don't know what our relationship looks like from here. I know that sounds sad, and sometimes, in the way that grief works around the edges of other feelings, it is sad. She is my sister. We grew up in the same house, we ate dinner at the same table, but I have stopped waiting for her to look at me the way my father looked at me. My father drove me to car shows on Sunday mornings when I was small and told me the history of everything. He left me a receipt and a box of tax returns. He paid an electric bill for 23 years so that I would have something when the time came. The time came. I found it. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what my father actually gave me. Not the cars, not the money. Those are real, and I'm not going to pretend they didn't change my life, because they did. But what he gave me before any of that, what he gave me when I was small and didn't know he was giving me anything, was the habit of paying attention. He took me to car shows on Sunday mornings. He told me the history of things. He showed me that value and appearance are almost never the same thing, and that the people who understand that difference tend to be quieter than everyone else in the room. I didn't know he was teaching me anything. I thought we were just looking at cars. There's something I keep coming back to when I think about Celeste. It would be easy to be angry at her. And I was for a while in the hot, disorganized way that anger works when it's really just hurt wearing different clothes. But I've spent enough time with this story now to see it more clearly. Celeste didn't do anything that she hadn't been allowed to do for a very long time. She took what was available. She made assumptions about what things were worth. She looked at a manila envelope and saw the end of a conversation. She looked at a storage facility on the east side of Columbus and saw $47,000 and a problem she didn't have to deal with. She never asked what was inside. That's not a character flaw in some dramatic sense. It's just what happens when someone stops being curious, when you assume you already know. When the appearance of a thing is enough and the substance of it doesn't interest you, you stop looking. And the things you don't look at, the things you dismiss without checking, those things don't disappear, they just end up belonging to someone else. My father knew exactly who would cut that lock open. He knew who had gone to car shows with him. He knew who had sat with him on the bad nights. He knew who had learned the difference between a Camaro Z28 and every other Camaro just because he said it mattered. He built a climate control system in 1999 and paid for it for 23 years because he knew the answer, and he was patient enough to wait. That kind of patience, the kind that builds something quietly and trusts that the right person will find it, is one of the most honest things one person can do for another. It requires knowing someone. Really knowing them. Not the version of them that's convenient. Not the version that fits into a family story someone else decided to tell. The actual person. I am 31 years old. I have a building with a bakery on the ground floor, and the smell of bread in the morning when I go to check the mail. I have a savings account that doesn't make me nervous to look at. I have, for the first time in my adult life, a version of the future that I chose rather than one I'm adjusting to. None of that came from luck. It came from showing up to a rundown storage lot on the Saturday morning when I didn't know what I was going to find. It came from going through boxes, from following a maintenance receipt to a locked unit, from not assuming I already knew what something was worth before I looked inside. My father used to say, Measure twice, cut once. Know where the water is going to go before you start digging. I cut the lock on Unit 11 with a pair of bolt cutters from a hardware store 6 blocks away. That's the whole story, really. The rest is just what happened after.